There's no question that Alexander Fleming's discovery of penicillin in 1928 is still one of the greatest contributions to modern medicine. It could have prevented events like the Great Plague of the 17th century that wiped out a quarter of the population of Europe. But now we've entered a different era. We've entered the era of overdiagnosis and overtreatment, what some have called Pharmageddon. It's estimated that 20 to 50% of all antibiotic use is inappropriate, and that's a conservative estimate. And what does that lead to? It leads to increased costs, it leads to increased side effects, it leads to resistance to bacteria, flesh-eating bacteria. But perhaps the greatest cost is something that's a little more difficult to quantify because we can't see it or touch it or measure it. And that's damage to this vitally important community of organisms that cohabitate with us, known as a microbiome, the word on everyone's lips this weekend, the M word. So what is a microbiome? It refers to all the microbes that live in or on the human body. And by microbes, I'm talking about bacteria, viruses, fungi, protozoa, those little one-cell pests, and all their genes. So we're talking about a lot of microbes. How many? Well, there are more microbes in just the gut alone than there are cells in your entire body. In fact, your bacterial cells outnumber your human cells by 10 to 1, making you more microbe than human, actually, if you think about it. We have known about the microbiome for centuries, from the 1600s when Antony von Leeuwenhoek first described, I think the exact quote was, the little animalcules very prettily a-moving in rainwater. But it's taken us about 400 years to figure out that these organisms are actually friends rather than foes, and that the majority of our microbes are not germs that cause disease, but quite the opposite. They're an essential part of our ecosystem, and they're vitally important for keeping us healthy. So many of us struggle or think about what we should eat in terms of maintaining an ideal weight or maximizing our nutrients. But as a list of conditions associated with a microbiome grows to include not just autoimmune conditions in the gut, like Crohn's and ulcerative colitis, things like diabetes and obesity, but bipolar disorder and other neurological conditions, as the list gets longer and longer, what we should really be thinking about is what should we be feeding our gut bacteria in order to optimize our microbiome and to keep us healthy. So I'd like to describe 3 studies to you that I think really make that connection nicely between diet and the microbiome. The first is a Harvard study done last year where they took 9 volunteers and they put them on 2 very extreme diets. The first was a low-carb, high-animal protein, sort of Atkins-like diet with bacon and eggs and brisket and salami, and I think it was pork rinds for snacks. And they looked at the microbiome before, during, and after the diet. And then they rested the same population of patients, which was a lovely feature of the study because a lot of these studies have looked at disparate populations that have always eaten differently, but have always lived in different environments too. So they took the same 9 patients and they put them on a plant-based vegan diet of jasmine rice and tomatoes and lentils and squash and fruit instead of pork rinds for snacks. And what they discovered was astounding. That not only did the bacterial species start to shift, but they shifted incredibly quickly. So within about a day, the species started to change. And we saw on the meat and cheese diet predominance of the bile-loving species, what we call the biophilia species, that help to break down fat, but are also associated with inflammation. And not only did the different bacterial species start to shift, but the genes that were activated started to change too. So here was this direct connection that the food you eat determines the bacteria you grow in your gut garden, as I like to call it. And the bacteria turn on different genes. And what do the genes do? They activate disease. So you are what you eat and what your gut bacteria eats, even more importantly.